All right, guys, thank you for joining us for another True Crime Myths, Legends, and More. I'm Jeff, your host. And yeah, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you have not gotten a chance yet, make sure you're paying attention to the lives that we're doing. Like these shows, pre recorded, because that's how this whole podcasting thing works. However, we're doing a live show every other week where we do a recap of this lovely podcasting format that we have. So you should make sure that you check out the lives that we're doing up on YouTube. I am trying to figure out how to get it to go also on Facebook and Twitter and other places. Clearly, I was not successful on the very first one that we did, but we'll figure it out. We'll get there. It went live on YouTube. You guys can view it there, but it is a great way to have discussion about the episodes that we go through with some of these different experts and kind of dig a little bit deeper and to look for more information, because that's the whole goal of this thing anyway. We want to really dig in deep. We want to get these other viewpoints about these famous true crime cases and these infamous people. And so we have a much more well-rounded view of true crime. Because a lot of times all we get from the documentaries is some one person's point of view. And if you know me, you know that I always want more than that. I love diverging opinions and I love discussing them. It doesn't mean I believe it. It just means that I am much, much more well-rounded and I understand the situation better. You should strive to do that in everything in life. It makes things a lot more fun. And then you can debate with people, and that's a lot of fun. So, yeah, check out those lives that are coming up every other week. The week after this one, we'll do a little recap. Maybe one of these times we'll get some of the guests on the show to come in so that they can say things to you too, which is always kind of cool. But it's kind of a more off the cuff. We'll do a little bit of trivia. We'll also do some current events, some things that are going on in true crime. There's a good possibility that we'll do, this day in true crime. We might do something like that, have a little segment that we talk about that. And the great thing is I'm not alone in that one. We have our UK contact from Scotland. Mary is on the show. And then we also have our New York contact. Sherry comes on the show and we all talk and laugh and joke and say stupid things. And yeah, it ends up being a lot of fun. So join in on that. You can join the chat. You can talk to us. It's a good way to stay in contact and give us your feedback directly, which is really good. So without further ado, tonight, we're going to be talking about the most infamous killer and the one that really got it started off for a lot of us, myself included. And I'll talk more about that story here in a little bit. But we're going to talk about Jack the Ripper. And we've got an incredible guy on here with us, Michael L. Hawley, who has also been in a ton of different things. He is one of the experts on the trial of Jack the Ripper documentary, which is really, really cool. Check that out. He was on the show Legend Hunter. He's written a bevy of books. So, he's got Jack the Ripper, Suspect, Dr. Tumblety, and I'm sure we'll cover and talk about that tonight for sure. But he's got a ton of different books. Actually, the most recent one, he's got two of them, and I'd like to ask about the second one. I'm kind of curious. But there's one, Dr. Francis Tumblety and the Railway Ripper, which came out in 2023. And the other one that came out in 2023 is called Curse of the Bayou Beast. And I'm kind of interested about that one. I didn't get an opportunity to look and read the back of that book. As you all know, I love cryptids and all these other monsters and stuff. Actually, the next episode that we do, we'll be talking about Krampus, which is really kind of cool because it is December and it's cold outside. And you should get warm, whether it's Krampus tanning your ass to make sure that you're not bad, or maybe you're just by the fireside. One of the two. All right, without further ado, we're going to bring Michael Hawley on with us tonight. How's it going?
Great. How are you doing, Jeff?
Fantastic. It is. It's been good. It's been busy, but definitely good. Enjoying, taking time. I just did a book festival here in Cincinnati which was really cool. And there was a guy. Oh my goodness, oh man. Oh, there it is. Actually, his book is sitting directly across from me right now. Kevin McQueen. He does a lot of local true crime in like Louisville and Kentucky, some in Ohio. And he does a lot of the like local true crime stories. He's written several books. He's also an English professor at Eastern Kentucky University. Really, really nice guy. We were sitting there next to each other at this book festival, and he turns to me and he says, "Oh my God, I recognize your name, Jeff." And I was like, "Oh, really?" He was like, "You're something quite famous in the true crime community." And I was like, "No shit, for real."
Nice.
So I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, that's nice to hear, I guess." Uh, so I wish that meant that all of my books and everything else sold better. That'd be great too. But we keep
Right.
we keep
Right.
working on that. The life
Absolutely.
of an author and a speaker. All about that. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that Curse of the Bayou Beast.
Oh, that one. Well, I do both fiction and nonfiction, and so the nonfiction is what really took off, and that's why they flew me to Liverpool to do a lecture, and then I did another one in Dublin and stuff, a filming in Dublin. But the fiction, I just love fiction as well because that just puts you into the place. So and it is actually the third of a trilogy where our protagonist is this lab rat guy from the FBI, Quantico, Virginia. But what happens is where there's a serial killing going on, and the locals ask him to join the task force, and he always gets his man or woman, and people don't know why he's so good at it. And so his nickname is the Watchmaker. He's so precise. He's so good at it. And then so what happens is the first one is actually about Jack the Ripper. It's called The Ripper's Hell Broth, and it was based on a true story, which we might get into. That there was a possibility that Jack the Ripper was a Jekyll Hyde type person during the day, prominent physician at night, a medical maniac looking for the elixir of life. That's why he needed the organs, because the fluid, let's say the uterus, because the fluids mixed with herbs would possibly do that. And so that really did happen. But then what happens in the book, there's serial killing going on in Western New York. And so the idea is they find out, our protagonist finds out that he's a Jack the Ripper copycat. But is he a copycat, or did the elixir really work? So he might be the real killer. So that's what I play with the audience there. So then the next one's in Boston called Jack's Lantern. It's not about Jack the Ripper. It's about the history of the jack-o'-lantern and Stingy Jack. And I mean, just a history of Halloween. So it's really cool because of the Irish background. Well, Curse of the Bayou Beast, that's I start with the Beast of Gérovant in France, where it could possibly be a werewolf. But then that connects to, so the French name for werewolf is loup-garou, and then but in New Orleans there's this loup-garou, or not rougarou. So it's very connected to the werewolf. So and that's the Bayou Beast. And so is that really true? Or is it some serial killer using a massive mastiff or something doing the killing? So I work with that. So I really have fun. So what I love to go back and do is I go back in time and have the story, and I go over actually what happened in Gérovant in France when that was happening, and connect it to today. So I have a modern day thing going on. So that's so fun. So that's what that's about.
That's super cool. I love fiction. Matter of fact, I was just on I don't know what the app is called now, but I was logging all of my entire library, and I was looking, like I have like 54% nonfiction and like 48% or 46% fiction books in my library right now. And I honestly haven't even went to the garage yet to get all that stuff. I just got the stuff here in my room. But I'm a huge fan of fiction. I've got a good friend of mine, Rami Unger, who is a horror writer. Awesome guy. And we've spent a lot of time together at conventions and stuff. But he like I always tell him he's so much more talented than I am because I can research really well and I can write. I guess okay. What what they've said is I write well to engage people, and ultimately that's what you're trying to do. But that means
Right.
that I'm a little bit crass and I speak my mind, and I don't give a shit what other people think or have to say. So that comes across in my writing. But I always tell him that I'm just not like I don't know that I'm creative enough to do fiction because like
Mhm.
that's when you really have to do work, right? Then you really have to figure everything out. I'm not just telling or repurposing the actual events.
Right.
Then I got to really come up with something and connect it and have characters and plot lines. And yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
about
Well,
that.
it really is a different world, but it's I can see what in the fiction novelist where they just love it and live it. And what happens when you do one, you're hooked. And it's hard not to do the next one. But then, but just like you as well, though, I love research. I have a passion for research. That was part of my master's thesis. And then so that right there is another passion. And then that was really the discoveries I had that really hooked everything. So I had to go that route. So
Yeah.
far, but I could go back.
Yeah. I think, when I was in high school, I started writing then. I don't think I've ever told this story. But when I was like in seventh or eighth grade, I started really writing and I would write short stories. But all of my short stories were basically all stolen from Stephen King, which is what I was reading at the time. And so I was like making my own short stories, like renaming his characters and stuff. But I mean, I was in seventh, eighth grade. And
Yeah.
so I remember I wrote actually I still have like the first major like short story that I did, and it is terrible. Terrible. And I still have it in a box somewhere. Every once in a while I pull it out and I look at it. It was called The Monster of Delane. And yeah, it's like one of these days I'm gonna get back to that and I'm gonna rewrite that whole thing just to see how far I've come
Mhm.
since I was like, in eighth grade writing. But I also, when I was in eighth grade, at the end of that year, we had to do a big report. And the report that I did was on forensic pathology. And we were supposed to turn in like a 6-page report. And mine was 23 pages with graphs and stuff. And they were like, "What in the hell, Jeff?" I went to my brother's college and I watched an autopsy be done
Oh,
in preparation for that report. So yes, for all of you out there, I was pretty macabre from an early age, doing some crazy stuff. So kind of flows in line, which is why you can't get me to shut up now. So so what got you into Jack the Ripper?
So what happened was, is I have an earlier book that called "Searching for Truth with a Broken Flashlight" on a completely different subject, and I was waiting in 2009 for Pulitzer Press had accepted it, but what happened was, is the economy went under. Remember, and so I was biting at the bit, waiting, and I love a mystery, and I watched this Mystery Quest episode on Jack the Ripper, but it was a British detective that was a British police officer that retired, that he discovered this Ripper letter, but it was actually a new an art a someone wrote a letter to another person, asking this person who was actually a chief inspector at the time of in Scotland Yard, who he thought Jack the Ripper was, and so he said he made he said talked about this Tumblety guy, and Stuart Evans is he'd been researching for 30 years already. He's one of the top experts, and it was shocked him that he never heard this name before. That's right, Stuart Evans, absolutely. I got to stay at his house, so we had a great
Oh
conversation. I
wow.
got to see the actual what they call little child letter and got to touch it. But so that
Oh
one
wow.
started it all. But what happened was that was in 1990s that happened. So, but what the Mystery Quest episode was 2009, and I watched it and I was shocked that this Tumblety was buried an hour away from my home. I live in Western New York, and he's buried in Rochester. And so, because I also do family history research, I found the gravesite, a family gravesite, and I went there and I YouTubed it. And when you watch me, I have these O.J. Simpson gloves on when I'm talking, but it looks like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't at the time because I just parroted what Stuart Evans said on the show. Well, then that started the research. And then so what I realized is the experts had already actually considered Tumblety not even a major suspect, the other experts. And Tumblety and Stuart Evans had stopped after 2 years and he decided not to research anymore. Well, because my background is paleontology and I do study of the physical sciences, I wanted to do my style of research. See, it's all about the data. So I went in and I found a world of information. It's really an amazing, shocking things that happen. So that's when I started writing articles for the Ripperologist magazine, and then the books came out, and then it was getting attention. So, and I love, just like you, I love debate. And then the debate is only, for me, it's for the truth. It's not just for fun to win. It's to discover the truth. And so what happens is when other experts challenge this, I show them the new information, the data, and that kind of, it's basically they say, oh. So, but that's what happened, and so that's how it began. It's just to find out who this Jack the Ripper was. So I was actually going to start with Tumblety. Once I believed that no, that guy was not it, I was going to go to the next suspect, and then go to the next one. I continue to find new information on Tumblety that is damning to him, and then that's what this last book is about. And then I actually have another book ready to go. But so that's kind of the story. But this last one is kind of a shocker.
Oh, wow. That's cool. We had just a couple weeks ago, we had Mark Hewitt on the show, and he has a whole series of books on the Zodiac. And so he did a very similar thing. He's got, the first book, he's really investigating all of the Zodiac murders and everything. And then he goes on to like profile who the Zodiac was and what that looked like. And then in the third book, he reveals who he believes it is. And he believes the Zodiac is Ted Kaczynski. And he makes an interesting, very compelling argument for that. One that I was not familiar with, which was really kind of cool. And it's fascinating, some of the information you find when you really dig in. And I think this is the thing that a lot of us miss, because we watch the TV shows and we watch the documentaries, we read the books, but we don't get to dig in to the real information that's out there. And there's a lot of these shows and everything that have a lot of fluff, right? There's a lot of a lot of leading people to believe this certain thing or that certain thing, and it's not really well done to give people a full view of the evidence that's there. We often talk about the same stuff and the Dear Boss letter and these different
as a matter
things.
of fact, what you're saying is that since the 1980s, that's when these books are starting to come out, and I found confirmation bias, and because many of the experts at the time were convinced of a suspect, his name is Kaczynski, and then so what happened is, though, while I'm going into the original research to find out what when I go into the coroner's inquest and read it myself, and then I go read that book and see that's not what he said. And so, especially with the eyewitnesses, now, by the way, there were no eyewitnesses because nobody saw the murders. So, so there are these almost eyewitnesses, and I did an interview with that too. So, but it's interesting to see that it's crept in right now in the world of ripperology. Some people consider things now as established fact because people have been talking about it for 2 decades, when I found out that can't be true. And then so that's the fun thing. And really, I go back with them. So I'm friends with all these guys so that we can debate it and then discuss it. And so that's like when Richard Jones had actually interviewed me, we went right into these so-called eyewitnesses. So, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think, this is one of those cases, being decades old, that there is so much, and one of the reasons why consequently I wrote about it, is that there's so much mythology that has risen up around, who
Yes.
Jack the Ripper was, even really getting down to who he killed, right?
Mhm.
And if there were only five victims, you have the five canonical victims of Jack the
Mm.
Ripper, but then there's 12 or 13 other murders before, some after, that we're not sure could possibly be attributed to Jack the Ripper. Don't know. And so, I cover a lot of that. I talk about that in the book.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that, I try to get people to understand right off the bat, we all have this idea. And I mean, I'm no different. I fell prey to that when I created Killers, the card game. I did not realize when I did that Jack the Ripper didn't target prostitutes. And that's always the idea. Like, we always think that that's all, he was after prostitutes. And that's not the truth. And, the fact is that at least maybe one, possibly two of the women were prostitutes, but the rest of them were just women that were living on the street, which was
Well,
common practice.
and but also what happens is those particular ones, they were prostituting, and this is one of the things that we like to discuss, is that uh, when you look at the coroner's inquest and you watch, for example, one of the women, Annie Chapman, they found out that they're trying to say that she wasn't, but what happened was is John Chapman actually challenged her in court because she was prostituting herself, and so that was
Really?
but they don't write about that, So the particular person I'm thinking about was trying to say that these people weren't, but what they were doing, you're right though, they're just trying to survive. They're considered unfortunates. Either you're going to have some man possibly just kind of like beating you up all the time, or you're going to go out on your own. But every one of these women, they were sadly in the drink. And then so what would happen was is they couldn't stay in workhouses at the time because workhouses forbade that. So what they would do is they would stay in the workhouse, then they would go off and go into a lodging home. So then to make the 2 pence or 4 pence enough to buy their gin, because that was the drink at the time. And then they would stay at a lodging house until they had their drunken stupor or whatever. And then so that's what was going on at the time. And then so we see that happening with that pattern. So the offender in this case was just you're right though, it's not necessarily that he was looking for a prostitute. He was looking for anyone on that street. And the nice thing about the prostitutes, or the people that want the business, as they called it, is that person approaches you. So there's not two crime scenes where you would have to attack a person, drag them into a private place and kill them. That's two crime scenes. So if the prostitute comes up to you first, or the unfortunate, then she brings you to a safe place because she doesn't want to get caught, especially in the Catherine Eddowes case, because that was not in Scotland Yard jurisdiction. That was in the city of London. And the police constables had a 15-minute beat. So they were around in the same spot every 15 minutes, while Scotland Yard was every half hour. So they had to know where they had to, the unfortunates knew that system, so they would follow them, and especially Catherine Eddowes. She was so good at it, and then so then they wouldn't get in trouble for it. So Jack the Ripper, and amazing, this guy, it's absolute stealth every single time. Even people around that area did not hear a thing. So it was all about stealth. It was just that's what really intrigues me about this killer.
It's amazing when we talk about that specifically. A very similar thing happens in the case of Bundy when he goes into the Chi Omega house. There are other people there. They don't hear a thing going
Right.
on. The same thing. And, we want to talk about recent, right? The Idaho 4 case, right? There were 4 people that got killed, and the other people in the house didn't hear a thing, and we wonder, how does that happen? when
Yeah.
you're brutally murdering somebody, whether it was this guy that they have in jail now, that is currently on trial, or if it was a group of people. How do you do that and nobody else hears it?
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, because you would think that if you're brutally attacking somebody, even if it's muffled, you're going to hear something, because you know people are fighting like for their lives, literally. So
Well, in the
it's
case with
almost baffling.
yeah, in the case with when we look at the Polly Nichols murder and also the Annie Chapman murder, actually, even with Catherine Eddowes, not so much Elizabeth Stride because that was an interrupted one, but their tongues were hanging out. You could see that they were actually strangled first, and so when you're being choked, you can't say a word, and then so they were out before the throat was cut. So there was no sadistic behavior with these because the mutilation was post-mortem, and
Yeah.
then so that's the amazing thing about this is this man, whoever did this, knew how to do it in silence, and choke them first and then cut their throat so the heart's not beating, so when he eviscerates there's no blood splatter.
Oh,
Now, so, and then there's a lot of slaughterhouses in the area, so it didn't really kind of matter a lot of times that you had blood on you, with the exception if you're wearing a cape or something. With that cape, you could drape yourself over. But it's just, to me, it's so intriguing that how that he did it in silence, and then how he sneaked away so quickly. Now, if it happened today, he'd get caught. But
oh,
back
for
then,
sure.
I mean, he really was amazing with the silence of it.
So what do you think about uh, the Ripper and what he would have been wearing? Because you just mentioned a cloak. We have this idea, mainly because of media and the documentaries and stuff, that Jack the Ripper was this very debonair, dressed to the nines in his top hat and
Top hat, yeah.
everything. Yeah, which at least when I did research is probably not true.
Correct.
But what I found is he probably looked more like a dock worker, which is how men typically were dressed in that area during the time. And because again, he found a way to commit these things and to either get away or to blend in so nobody knew it was him. And how do you do that silently if you're dressed like a prince, versus a pauper?
And also, if you were dressed as a prince, you are a target for all the gangs. So even with Tumblety, he told this to the reporter that when he was in the Whitechapel district, he dressed to not bring attention to himself. And then so that would be pretty much anyone that was going to do something. You want to blend in. And I even, let's say, look at that 500-pound Bengal tiger, beautiful, gorgeous thing. But what do? They blend in with their environment. It's stealth that they use. So this killer, this offender, he definitely could blend in, and that was to me, you'd fit. I mean, you had in that morning, you had Carmen going to work. You had again people working in slaughterhouses, a lot of different kind of jobs. So that would pretty much fit wherever you had, as long as you're not wearing something, as you were talking about, a top hat. Now there were people that were slumming it. The wealthy West End, they would come and slum it, but that was a different story. So that if you're, and think about this, in these cases where, let's say for example, Annie Chapman, he's back in 29 Hanbury Street. He collects the uterus, and then within minutes he is leaving. And now the problem with this thing is when he leaves, if he gets stopped. Now, if you had blood on yourself, you could say, well, I just grabbed something, from the slaughterhouse or something. But if you had a uterus, that is
Yeah.
absolute conviction right there. So this person is leaving with things that would be an immediate, you'd be caught. So that right there, to me, that means there was a reason why he wanted that, and he's going to keep that thing. So Like when he left Catherine Eddowes, he had the uterus and the kidney, but he ripped off a piece of leather apron that he dropped off on Goulston Street, but he still kept those organs. So, and then some people are thinking that he was using that apron to cover the organs, but then why would he throw the apron away and keep the organs? So there's other details that I like to to get into deeper.
Yeah, for sure. So here, and you kind of alluded to it there. There's a school of thought, and this was kind of supported by the some of the initial reports back then and the investigations that they were doing, because people, said, well, they had some kind of medical knowledge, and that's kind of
Right.
been the prevailing idea for 100 years.
Right.
But there was also the idea that he had no medical knowledge, that it was rudimentary at best. So,
Right.
what do you think?
Well, this is where the confirmation bias comes in when I found out. So what's happening is when Annie Chapman, so Polly Nichols was murdered, and there was evidence of interruptions. So her throat was cut deep to the spine, and then there was this deep gash down the left side of her abdomen. And then there were a couple of carmen that were walking by, and that kind of happened, the interruption. So what happened is a week later, Annie Chapman was in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, had the same thing, but then her uterus was taken. So I'm convinced that if those carmen didn't walk by at the time, Polly Nichols would have had her uterus taken. And then so we have, this. What was again your question? I wanted to, because I was going to lead into the medical
Whether
knowledge. Yes.
mm-hmm.
So what happened is Coroner Baxter, Win Baxter, and also George Phillip, the surgeon at the time, the police surgeon, was convinced that the killer was actually seeking out the uterus, because the organs were over the shoulder, and so he was convinced, and so the Coroner Baxter was convinced that that's what he was doing. That's where that theory of the Jekyll Hyde came from, where maybe this person was using that uterus to get some elixir. And if you look at all modern day serial killers, and if you look at the experts, almost always, if there's organs taken, there's cannibalism involved. And so if you look at the From Hell letter, what did he do? He ate a little bit of that kidney. So, but in this case, so that uterus was taken. So what happened though, then when let's say Elizabeth Stride was murdered, there was interruption, but then that was a double event. So then Catherine Eddowes was murdered within an hour in the City of London district, and her uterus and kidney were taken. Now, the police surgeon at that time, this Dr. Brown, what he realized was, yes, the uterus was taken, and the person had to have some medical knowledge, because that kidney was behind a membrane. So if your purpose was only to mutilate, why would you go behind that membrane to grab that kidney? So then what happened is the last murder that was indoors with Mary Kelly, this Dr. Thomas Bond, this police surgeon, was asked by Assistant Commissioner Anderson to help out. He was convinced when he saw Mary Kelly, because Mary Kelly's body was completely eviscerated. Her, everything was taken off, just like an anatomical Venus at the time. Well, what happened is at that he believed that there was the killer had no medical knowledge. It was only because of the act of mutilation. And so what happens is now it just depends on who you want your suspect to be.
Yeah.
And so people that say, oh, meaning this, the only suspect out there that had a reason to grab organs is actually Francis Tumblety. The other ones have no purpose for the organs. And so Dr. Thomas Bond is a favorite to say that Jack the Ripper had was not looking for any organs. So as I was saying, in modern day research, you see that there is always a purpose. So, and not only that, actually, both police surgeons are wrong. What they find out is that also by studying modern day serial killers that do take organs, it's always more than one purpose, more than
Hmm.
one motive. So what they're saying is Dr. Thomas Bond could very well be correct that the serial killer had this bloodlust just to play with organs, but also they could have been collecting as well. Thomas Bond said that was not impossible. But think about it; those guys were surgeons. They weren't experts. If you look at the modern forensics experts today, they're not surgeons.
Yeah.
This is police surgeons. So everybody is now assuming that Dr. Thomas Bond is the ultimate expert, even though today we don't use a surgeon to to look at the motives of serial offenders. And that's what they're doing. So what my point is that that's why that people are so convinced that there was no purpose to get the organs. Yet again, as I see that again, getting that kidney behind the membrane, putting the organs and two of the women on the side. If they would just had a lust to play with organs, they would have played with the intestines, but they put them over because they were collecting something. So I see that. And again, because what I see is more damning evidence with Francis Tumblety. And again, he had a reason for it. Here it is. Francis Tumblety, during the Civil War, had a uterus collection. How many people do you... So he had a uterus collection. And also, in the year of the murders, 1888, January 1888, he was in Toronto, and a Toronto reporter asked him about his health, and he said that he's constantly in fear of sudden death because of kidney and heart disease. Jack the Ripper took the uterus out of two women, the kidney out of one, and the heart out of one. Those exact organs matched Tumblety. Nobody else, because then if I discuss this, then someone will say, well, we don't know if that was his motive, because Dr. Thomas Bond said so. So my point is, why are you looking at Dr. Thomas Bond as gospel when modern day experts say, okay, he could be right, but that's not the only thing. He could also have been looking for organs, and there's evidence. That's why George Bax just saw that. He saw that there definitely that he was looking for the uterus, specifically the uterus.
So it's interesting. Fast forwarding 150 years or so. We look at modern medicine now, and it's interesting that you talk about this whole possibility of the elixir, right? But the truth, it's not far from the truth. We now know that stem cells, right, are like the thing that really rebuilds our body to begin with. They're now injecting stem cells into all kinds of injuries and things like that to have people recover faster and heal better. And so there's like all this stem cell therapy. And so, a lot of that comes from the uterus and from the cord blood and things like that. So, like, something that may have been, an idea back then has some basis in actual scientific fact.
Well, as a matter of fact, it was a scientific question, as in, can we extend life? If we can, how far can we extend life? As a matter of fact, that even the year, the next year was when they were grinding. What was his name? I forgot his name. He was a French scientist doing that very thing to try to, again, the elixir, try to create the elixir of life. That was a scientific question. And then so that was actually happening. And then even when it was interesting that the Lyceum Theater, when the beginning of the Ripper murders was actually showing Mansfield's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was being shown at that time. And then and in there, Bram Stoker, author of Dracula, was the business manager. His best friend was Sir Henry Hall Caine, who was the boyfriend of Tumblety, by the way. But the people that were working at the Lyceum Theater, beginning in 1888, started the Order of the Golden Dawn. One of their primary goals was to look for the Philosopher's Stone, or the elixir of life. And so it's so funny because it's all kind of connected, because that's really what here it is. In Tumblety, he had this obsession for the elixir, and he even talks about it in his 6 autobiographies. 6. talk about narcissism. So,
Oh man, that's funny. And there is something else that we find with all of these killers, right? Almost every single one of them, without fail, has some form of narcissism, right?
yeah,
And
narcissistic
so,
personality disorder. Yes,
yeah, so there is certainly this aspect of personality that goes into it. So, obviously, we've talked about this enough. You lean heavily towards Tumblety.
and
Uh,
not 100%, because if you ever do 100%, you're done. Yeah, so
yeah,
I'm a researcher. I want to continue to look, but I just uh, as I'm going to explain what the new stuff I found is. Like, I can't believe it. I could have found something that said, "Oh, Tumblety was in France during the murders." I could have, because I was looking for it. But this latest book called Francis Tumblety and the Railway Ripper, the question I always get is, now nobody saw the murders. So when Tumblety was arrested on suspicion of the Jack the Ripper murders, they didn't have any evidence on him. But what happened was when they cabled a headquarters at Scotland Yard, he had this huge file. And this is what the Chief Inspector Littlechild talked about, his huge file. And it talked about his bitter hatred of women, his extreme hatred of women, and some other things here. But what happened was that was a red flag. So basically what they were doing is, well, if we have him nailed on a misdemeanor charge because he was molesting young men at the time. So, and they had him nailed. So they said, if we put him in prison for 2 years, if the murder stopped, maybe we caught our guy. Well, what happened is when they charged him with that misdemeanor offense in November 7th, when he charged him with the misdemeanor offense, it was misdemeanor, so he got to post bail. He posted bail. Again, he posted bail twice, but so he sneaked out of the country and the murder stopped. So the question I always get is, and then he sneaked back to America. And then so to New York City. And then what happened was these Scotland Yard detectives followed him, and he saw that in the newspaper December 4th, and he vanished. And nobody knew where he went until just a couple of years ago when they found out where he went. He went to Waterloo, New York, because that's where his sister lived. And he had sneaked out of Toronto 8 years before, getting in trouble for molesting a young man. That's where he sneaked off to. And that was under sworn testimony by the son of Thomas Powderly, which is the son of his sister. So what happened was, the question I get though is, if he truly was a serial killer, when he came back to America, were there any Ripper-like murders in America? That's a valid question, because we talk about serial offenders continuing to kill, although sometimes there's gaps, like the BTK killer that we were discussing a bit ago. So, honest to God, I researched. I found 39 murders, unsolved murders of young women who were neither raped nor robbed. Tumblety couldn't rape because he was what they called a hermaphrodite at the time. He had both male and female parts, so he was already confused. So he didn't have anything to work with, so he couldn't rape, and he didn't rob either. He was a millionaire. But these women that I found, they were always near railroad tracks. They were murdered out on the street or outside. And again, most times when a young woman was murdered outside, they were both, they call it outrage, which is rape, and then murdered because the guy didn't want to get caught, or they were robbed. But so they called them motiveless murders, and they didn't know what these things were, because of course now we know there's serial killers, what they do. So, and it started in 1880, 1870s. I don't find any, maybe one or two something, but then 1880, I see them pretty much once a year. And then so 39 that I cannot eliminate him, because I usually find him in that same town. The reporter is convinced it was him in one case. And then, so these stories, the devil's in the details, but the details are even cooler. But I found 37 attempted murders. And the nice thing about the attempted murders is that you usually get an eyewitness physical description. And Tumblety was unusually tall at the time. He was 6 foot. And when he came back to America, he was wearing an Ulster coat. So what happens is, time and time again, it's tall man in a gray Ulster coat, tall man in a thick mustache, gray Ulster coat. tall man with a gun too. And so Tumblety used to carry a gun. So so here it is. So what happened was all 76 assaults and murders were near the railroad tracks or near a railroad station. And think about it. At that time, there was no FBI. And so if you were on the tracks, if you're a serial killer, you get off the station, murder a woman, get back on that train and leave. Those local detectives are looking for an ex-boyfriend, a farmhand. They're not thinking that someone just came into town to kill. And so it was just the perfect thing to do. And what happened was I wish I could show you the picture, but I mapped out all the 76 attempted murders and assaults of these women. And Tumblety was a transient. He would travel. He would never stay in a place more than a week or so, sometimes 3 weeks, but he'd always be traveling by train. Superimpose that, they match. And then so it's really intriguing. So it goes from, now I know that Tumblety found out that he contracted syphilis around 1880, between 1870 and 1880, that he contracted syphilis. And now what he was a devout Catholic, and but he believed in a misconception. It was not Adam that committed the original sin. It was Eve deceiving Adam. Therefore, women are the curse of the land. All disease came to the earth because of the original sin. So that disease he caught, even though he didn't get it from a woman, he blamed women for that. And so what happened, though, is, here it is. He was actually a quack doctor, and he made millions by claiming that he could cure all diseases, including syphilis. Here he finally catches it, contracts it because he was hypersexual. And so this is when I start to see these murders, unsolved murders. And the cool thing is all 76 of these women, you Google their name, you won't find it. Everyone was buried in history. So the cool thing is now I'm giving them a voice. And then everyone has a story going on. And then next thing you know, there's a tall man in a gray ulster coat next to the train tracks. So
wow.
So it's quite intriguing. So some of the other details, if you want to know some of those, are pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I mean, I was going to ask you what you thought about the possibility of there being murders before and after, and you already answered that. So
yeah, especially when you look at those murders, the Jack the Ripper murders, it's not, some people say, and this I'm going to argue against this one too, and you'll hear this in every Jack the Ripper book, that the murders progressed in violence, and which is kind of true, but I'm saying that that's an illusion, because here's Polly Nichols. Her throat was cut deep, and then she had a gash, and then Annie Chapman had throat cut deep, gash, but then two organs were taken, or one organ was taken, and then Elizabeth Stride was just a throat cut, and she was interrupted, but then within an hour later, then Catherine Eddowes was mutilated, her face was attacked, but also her organ and a kidney and a uterus were taken. And so the very last one was indoors with Mary Kelly, and it was complete. She was completely opened up, as in you could, and then and here it is, Dr. Thomas Bond again. When he looked at it, he said the heart was missing. He didn't say heart was taken. And I think the reason why he didn't say heart was taken is because he wanted to make sure people thought that the motive was mutilation as opposed to collecting organs. So that's why I'm saying that. He said, and it was missing, because a lot of organs were missing. They're all over the place. And so some people are saying, well, maybe it was, it was over, on the other side of the room or something like this, missing from the body. But there were a bunch of things. The breasts were missing from the body, if it's that way. So I'm just saying that was just Dr. Thomas Bond saying the organ was taken. So the heart was taken.
Well, you think about, if there, even with this idea of there being a progression, if you have a doctor who is obsessed with this elixir of life, right? And he's testing things out and he's trying things with each and every murder, he's adjusting his, elixir. Of course, he would now take more and more things to, like, okay, well, that didn't work. What do I need to do to make this work? Do I need this part? What about this part? And you wonder if that's why there's a progression versus he's becoming a more and more effective killer.
Right. And then the other thing is that Mary Kelly was indoors, and so the offender had hours with the body. With
Yeah.
the other ones, he knew very well that, especially Catherine Eddowes, that PC Tompkins was going to be there within minutes. And so with the other ones, it's a half hour thing. So he only had minutes with these bodies. So he had to go fast. And then I'm saying that Polly Nichols and also Elizabeth Stride were interrupted. So we don't know how far he would have gone. Catherine Eddowes was a little more, but he only had minutes, just minutes. And it was almost complete darkness. And then so that's why I see that Mary Kelly was more, is because he had so much time. So when we talk about MO versus offender signature, so MO is basically, is to get the job done. And so that's what, we're looking for the MO of Jack the Ripper. One is absolute silence, but offender signature, that deals with personality. So you're not going to find the offender signature much with those first murders because he had to work so fast. But with Mary Kelly, he had that body for 2 hours. And so that's why everything was attacked. It was display like you can't believe. So, yeah.
Yeah. So with that being said, and you mentioned that, you would never say 100%, who else do you have that is at the top of your list?
So far, nobody's at the top of the list. So meaning this. So the reason why Kosminski is a very popular one for us since the 1980s. And the reason why Kosminski is there is because the top person in charge, Assistant Commissioner Anderson, said it's an ascertained fact that it was a Polish Jew. He did not say that at the time of the murders. And we know that within let's say 1888 were the murders. From 1888 to 1894, when you look at what he says, is he's still saying that they're still unsolved. So he doesn't know that. So it was McNaughton, Chief Constable McNaughton is the one that is the first time we hear of this man named Kosminski. And then then a few years later, we see this, that he's considering an ascertained fact. What the ascertained fact was, by the way, the ascertained fact was eyewitness testimony, 2 years old, and it wasn't even in a lineup. It was face-to-face, one-on-one. So, in a line, the reason why we do a lineup is that now, they can recognize that's the person. It kind of corroborates the eyewitness. But if it's face-to-face, that's a different story. And so he's saying the reason why he's convinced it was Kosminski is because this person looked at Kosminski 2 years later, face-to-face, and still just refused to say it was Kosminski because he's a fellow Jew, and he doesn't want Gentile law. So that's why he's saying this. So now we have a whole bunch of people saying this. And what happened is the eyewitness that saw him possibly, Catherine Eddowes was in Mitre Square, and on a side street, Duke Street, there's these three Jewish men that were walking by, and they saw an unfortunate with a man, and that here is and this guy name is Joseph Levendy, claims that he didn't get a good look, but he saw them and so then he walked by. So what happened is that's the person they used 2 years later who said at the coroner's inquest they didn't get a good look. Yet 2 years later, he's absolutely convinced, and then now that's called ascertained fact. We wouldn't say that. Eyewitness testimony is the worst anyway. But the problem is that the prostitutes or the unfortunates, I told you before, they knew the beats of these police constables. And so Mitre Square was controlled by P.C. Watkins, who never went on Duke Street. He was on the other side on Mitre Street. And so what happens is and off that is Aldgate. And so there's reports that there was someone that looked like Catherine Eddowes on Aldgate waiting for P.C. Watkins. So P.C. Watkins went into that Mitre Square, walked out. She knew darn well he won't be back for 15 minutes, and that's why they went in there. Well, the other side, where this woman was on Duke Street, that was controlled by P.C. Harvey, had a completely different beat. So that whoever that unfortunate was knew it was PC Harvey's beat, not PC Watkins. So she was worried about PC Harvey, not Watkins. And Harvey came 5 minutes later and saw nobody. Why? Because that woman knew PC Harvey's beat. So a lot of these people are saying that, no, no, no. So what happened is this unfortunate brought that guy into Mitre Square, of course, not knowing when Watkins is going to be around, and then murdered. So I'm saying that that does not fit what the established, what these unfortunates knew to do. We know that happened because we know that the police constables purposely would walk backwards their beat because of that. And then so we know that they're smart. They don't want to get caught. So I talked too much. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. It's great information because this is the stuff and dispelling all of these ideas that have cropped up over the years is really cool.
Just like you said, you want to see where, I mean, I think that's the important thing is like a lot of people read a lot, but if you want to go into the original research and find what the coroner's inquest says, okay, I can see why some people from the 1980s and 1990s see this like this, but they failed to take into account this part. And then you don't see the coroner's inquest. Actually, it's a newspaper reporter that was there, or a couple of them. So they have different accounts of what they said. And so then you look at all 5 of those accounts, and if they match, you can, that kind of corroborates that was actually said. But then there's differences. So here it is. Somebody accidentally took this as gospel when the other reporters didn't say that or said something different. So we are now considering that correct when it wasn't. So that's the fun part of getting into the research about it.
It's funny because it doesn't seem like in all those years we've come very far because we still live in the same time. You listen to one person say something and you got 7 different opinions of what that one sentence meant. And it's it's unbelievable. You think we progressed past that, and we definitely haven't.
And you know what, though? That is the fun thing about it, is because it really is historical. We'll never know for 100% sure. But here it is. What I just found out is not only do I'm convinced I found a serial killer that was exploiting the railways. Surprise, surprise. There's a Jack the Ripper suspect always in town, always near the area. And if you look at modern day serial killers like the Golden State Killer, no one knew it was him, even his wife, his kids. So people ask me, was there any record of Tumblety being physically abusive to women? No, there was a lot of record of him hating them and being women threatening, fearing to be in the same room. There was that. But then again, look at all these modern day serial killers that are really stealthy like that. Even the BTK killer, Dennis Rader, he worked at a church, right? So it's like, So we're talking about that fits the mold that nobody knew about it. And then, so why would he want to? And we talk about serial killers not only having narcissistic personality disorder, but also, antisocial personality disorder. And Tumblety rarely spoke with people unless there was a reason, if making money or whatever. So it's like amazing.
So we've talked a ton about Tumblety. So give me the brief history of who Tumblety was, because we've talked a bunch about him, but we really haven't given anything about who he was as a person.
Yeah, and I found some more things. Nobody knew the background because sometimes you can't trust the person, because he claimed he was the son of a famous surgeon in Dublin, but he wasn't. So what happened is I found him. He County Meath, Ireland. He was one of 11 children, and it was a tenant farm, so poorer than poor. And so what happened is in 1847 he came on a famine ship with his mother, his father, a brother, and a sister. Already 3 older brothers and sisters had moved into the Rochester area because the Erie Canal was going, and it was very the New York State was doing very well. So there was a boon in the economy there. So it was easy to get a job. So that's why they were coming. And then there are already lots of Irish coming this way. And so that's what he did. He came during that time. So that was 1847, and he was born 1830. So then when he was young, he got hooked up in Rochester with a French cures doctor, a quack doctor in the French persuasion. That usually French is more on the sexual diseases, and so that's where he learned how to give an abortion, all this kind of stuff. So, but then and deal with syphilis. Well, but then just a few years later, then he got hooked up with an Indian herb doctor, this guy who was R.J. Lyons, and he was charismatic and he was a moneymaker. And so then Tumblety took both those, crossed the border into Canada to London, Ontario, because Lyons's business operation, his own area of operation was Western New York. So he didn't want to go there. So he went into Ontario, which it was called Canada West at the time. And within 3 years, he became a millionaire by today's standards. He would go to these local towns, and then he would make to London. He bought 3,000 acres in London, so he was going to stay there because he was just making money hand over fist there. But eventually, he made his way east towards the east through Canada, Montreal, into St. John. But what was happening was he was molesting young boys at the same time and also getting in trouble with the law. And so practicing as a physician without a license. And in Canada, that was illegal. You had to get approval. Even if you were a U.S. doctor, a medical diploma wasn't good enough. You had to go there. So that's what happened for the first few years. And then just before the Civil War, what happened is in the St. John, here it is, 1860, one of the young carpenter under his care died. And so they had a coroner's inquest. The night before the coroner's inquest, Tumblety sneaked into that examination room because they had to do an autopsy. They wanted to find out if his drugs is what caused the death. He tried to steal the guy's organs. So he had this passion for organs way back then. So then what happened was he sneaked out of the country, out of St. John's, and then went back to Boston for a while. But then he eventually made it to New York City, and then that Civil War was starting up. And then President-elect Lincoln was going in New York City, and guess who's next to President-elect Lincoln's buggy was Tumblety, right next to him. I mean, there's a connection between that. And then but then what happened was that first year in Washington, D.C., he went to Washington, D.C., because he was always getting in trouble not having a medical diploma. He was claiming he did, that he got one in Dublin and he got one somewhere else. And so what he wanted to do was he wanted to convince General McClellan, who was the general of the Potomac at the time there in Washington, D.C., to have him part of his surgical staff. And he wasn't going to do that, but he wanted that to happen so then he could talk about it in his autobiography and claim that he was an Army surgeon. That's what he did all the rest of his life, that he was a retired Army surgeon. But what happened was surgeons at the time, they wanted to show how good they were at their job. They would do illustrated medical lectures, illustrated with the organs that they collected themselves. So what happened is we have a report of him in July 1860, right there, giving a medical lecture to the officers, the eyes and ears of the general, and showing his anatomical museum. He had all these organs, and his favorite part was his collection of uteruses from women of every class. And then so here it is. He's got this this passion for these organs at the time, a long time before 1888. So, but what happened then is, he would he's going to city, making money being a quack doctor. But then he was basically getting kicked out, or he'd get arrested. So there were a couple times he just almost got arrested, like in Philly. But so that's basically what happened. But then what happened was during the Civil War, they arrested him on suspicion of being involved with the Lincoln assassination, which is not true. A new book came out, and they should have talked to me because they used bad data. But it's not true. But what happened was when they arrested him in St. Louis, they took all of his money that was in the bank, and that was like he claimed over $1 million. So he would go to England because he considered himself a British subject still because he was born in Ireland. He tried to get the British government to get his money back from the U.S. government, which never worked. So that started from 1869. And then since then, he kept on going to England every summer, basically, until 1888, the Ripper murders. So that's how he got himself in there. So that's where he started going back and forth. And then, but in the meantime, he was always getting himself in trouble. But it was 1878, 1880 is where he stopped being a advertising as a quack doctor. He wouldn't say quack doctor, but as a cure-all doctor. And then that's when these murders started happening. So especially this one in 1881, where here's this woman, this young lady, she in Connecticut, she moves back. She's coming back to Manhattan, where she's from, to go to a quack doctor to have an abortion. She doesn't want anybody to know that she's having an abortion. So she stays at a friend's house in Manhattan, and then she tells that friend that the doctor that she met that day says, I'm going to leave in the morning to have my, not abortion, but I have an operation. She didn't know that it was an abortion. Well, she vanished. Well, a month later, they found her body, dismembered body along the tracks in past Brooklyn in Long Island. Her head was with the body, but not the organs. So they went, because her head was there, they identified her immediately, and they found out that, who she was. So they went back to that Dr. Thomas. Jeff Thomas was that quack doctor. And he had an alibi. He wasn't even in Manhattan. Never went to him. Now, he did know her. That's why she was going to him. Well, what you know, closer to that lady's house, which is a couple blocks, was the office of Francis Tumblety. And He was in New York City at that time, had an office. We know that for sure, for a couple other reasons. And here it is. Just think if you are now, you know how serial killers have a trigger. So something, they don't start killing as a baby, but once they start killing, then they have, that taste. But like, here it is, 1881. 1880 was when he discovered he had syphilis. In 1881, here's this person coming in saying, I don't want anybody to know I'm here. I need an abortion. So here it is. Let's talk about a fly going into the spider's web. And then her organs are missing, but her head's still there along the train tracks. So how ironic is here's Jack the Ripper taking organs, and then Tumblety's connected to these organs even before that. So, and it's like, and that lady was looking for a quack doctor. And then there are not very many quack doctors, really. So New York City was the size of Buffalo at the time. So about 300,000 people at the time. So here it is. Within just a few blocks was Tumblety's office. And she was from Manhattan, so she would have known that too. So,
yeah. Well, I'll tell you, one of the things I've always been fascinated by is the whole, these grifters that went around the country selling these cure-all medicines. And I've always thought that was really neat. I actually, for a while, and I have a few things here at the house, some quack medical devices from like the early 1900s and 1930s, because it went all the way until then.
And he say Tumblety on them?
No, but there's I've always thought that is really interesting, like just the things that they would do, because of course during that time electricity is very new, right? And so there is this idea that this is the new cure-all. There were combs that they made that had electrical charges that you could run through your hair to deal with baldness and things like that. And I just always think that that's really neat, this development of but again, later on, now you have hair removal, right? What do they use? They use electrolysis, right? To remove hair. So it's interesting to see this progression of medical devices that come directly from that time, these ideas. Before then you have I can't think of what the name of it is, but you had bloodletting and things that happened, and
And taking
You know,
mercury,
yeah,
ingesting
yeah,
mercury.
yeah, it's amazing when you look at all of that stuff, and you have these people that go around. So how did what was Tumblety's eventual demise?
So what happened was, found out that 2 years prior to the Ripper murders, 1886, he started socializing with a neurosurgeon and Dr. Hammond Dr. Hammond, he was an expert in paresis, or what they call paralysis of the insane. Today we call that neurosyphilis, which is tertiary stage of syphilis. And so it affects the mind, affects the kidney and the heart. So here's Tumblety claiming that, when he died, they called it nephritis or Bright's disease, is the way he'd call it. But the doctor that signed his death certificate was an expert at nephritis. So to a hammer, everything's a nail, right? So he admitted in court that he had no idea of any mind diseases, as in neurosyphilis. He admitted that in court. So I have that on record. So basically, what happened is Tumblety died from that neurosyphilis in 1903. So here it is. He died with $3.4 million of today's value in the New York bank. So here it is. He had this money, but 1894, 1895, we start seeing, I found we got 40 sworn testimonies of Tumblety, of people that knew Tumblety in the last 20 years of his life. That was in the archives in St. Louis. So in there, it shows that, all these eyewitnesses, about 1894, 1895, he no longer wore anything really nice. It was all, he dressed as a homeless person for the rest of his life. And then, and that's where we start seeing a lot of activity too. But so you could see that it was getting to his brain. And so he was still traveling at the time. And then, so this is right around the time where you get this person in New York City called Jack the Tripper. So this guy would come Washington Square, and he would actually, this is 1892. So he would, Tumblety used to wear diamonds and stuff like this at that time. And this man would walk by this woman, and then he would trip the woman, and the woman, so I hear I'm knocking things over, and the woman would fall on her face, and he would run away. And so the police called him Jack the Tripper. Well, he was a tall man, well-dressed, dark hair, thick mustache, and Tumblety lived 1 block away. So then here it is, another one, 1895 to 1898. This is now where here's a man, he was, they called it in the papers the meanest man around. So for a few months, what he would do, this person, tall man in a gray Ulster coat, thick mustache, at night, woman walk by, squirt acid on his dress and run away, on her dress and run away. And then one time, this person sprayed something in the woman's eyes, and he ran away. Well, they found out it was a combination of cayenne pepper and shavings of the tips of needles to go in the eyes to do permanent damage to the woman's eyes. So with the BTK killer, remember there was a time where he wasn't killing. So they call what they do is non-homicidal fantasy activities.
Yeah.
And that's what non-homicidal, because they're stopping for a reason, for a little bit, for whatever reason it is, not getting caught, the police are close or whatever. And so you could see Jack the Ripper times, or this meanest man right there. There was a time where I don't see these unsolved murders, but I see these, nasty little things that are going on. So, but then here it is, 1903, he died in St. Louis. 1900, I thought, he's too old. So he would always travel to Hot Springs, Arkansas for the last 20 years, because that was the mecca for syphilis patients. And then there's a train that goes from Arkansas through Jefferson, Texas, right to Galveston, Texas. So what happened is there were in Galveston, Texas in 1900, not Galveston, but Jefferson, Texas, two young men were partying with this young woman. She passes out. So what do? They take her, they drag her to the local train station. She's passed out. They put a sign on her saying, "Take me to San Antonio," for a joke. Well, the next morning, she was mutilated. And so both those young men had ironclad alibi. So it's still unsolved. Wouldn't you know, 1 week later was that major Galveston storm, and I think it was August 1900. That it was a hurricane, and I have a report. Guess who was in the hurricane? Tumblety was in the hurricane. He was in Hot Springs on that train track. That's the train track that goes from Hot Springs to Galveston, and there was a woman mutilated right there at night. So to me, again, here's this person seeing this woman, getting off the train station, whatever. There's, that's what I'm finding is like, I can't believe it. Here it is, tumbling next to another unsolved, murder of, mutilation.
Wow. Wow. That's, when you look at stuff like that, it can't just all be happenstance, right? That this guy is there, and he's got all of this past history of all of these things, and he just happens to be there at 30 plus murders. Something is happening there. So switching from Tumblety, so of course this got publicized in the last, probably 10 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of the DNA.
Oh, right.
That what do you think about that whole thing? I'll tell you what I think.
We got into that. We researched that quite a bit. Now, that even made a peer review journal, and now the peer review journal is embarrassed, and they even said they were embarrassed because what happened is peer review means this: the peers, experts, are supposed to review your data. They're not supposed to see. The thing about science is people don't understand is the data must absolutely follow to your conclusion, the data and your arguments, and if it doesn't, the peers look at it and say, you failed to take into account this, this, and this. Therefore, we reject that. So you have two different things. You have people for the peer review journal. You have what they call referees, scientists that look at it and say this doesn't fit because there's opinion. If there's opinion in a scientific peer journal, they have to take it out. You got to get your opinion out. So it's all has to fit. And then what happens is then it goes published to the other experts, and then they get to try to reproduce it or whatever they're doing. But in this case, they put it in a peer-reviewed journal, and they did not have the data. They hid the data from the experts. So then the experts went back to this magazine, the newspaper. Now, of course, the owner of that shawl, by the way, paid $3 million for that shawl. So what happens is, by the way, so what's going on is that there's two things they're supposedly have found. One is that semen on that shawl. So what they're saying is Catherine Eddowes, she was murdered, and so Amos Simpson, who was a patrol constable from Scotland Yard, saw that and collected that. And then, at the murder, knew it was a famous murder, so it collected it. So here it is. So then that shawl, now they find supposedly possibly semen, and that semen is matched to Kosminski's descendants or something. That would be Kosminski. Well, the reason why that's wrong is because what they realized was there were two. This expert we talked about, who was actually the expert that did the DNA analysis of one of the kings in England, said that the data that they showed that there were actually two marker differences. What that means is it's actually disproves it. It doesn't prove it. When it's two markers like this, it doesn't prove it. It doesn't verify it. It disproves it. So what he showed was actually disproving that. And then the other one was the mitochondrial DNA, which is in the mitochondrion on the female. So it follows the mothers, because that was in the egg. And so apparently that Catherine Eddowes, is connected to this. And so that they're trying to say that the blood is matched to that, which again is not, it does not match. And so that's what this other expert showed. And so I actually have a couple not documentaries, but lectures. I get into detail, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So it really does not match that. And then but the other problem is chain of custody.
Exactly.
That patrol constable, by the way, he was a Scotland Yard PC. Catherine Eddowes was in the city of London. There would be no reason why a patrol constable would be in the city of London, and we know that he was actually at least 10 miles away working. How did he get there? And they wouldn't have not even allowed it. And we also know this. Remember what happened? Catherine Eddowes. We had PC Harvey look in there at 140, and there was a light behind him. So that Jack the Ripper saw this police constable coming at him right there. So that's likely when he sneaked away. 144 is when PC Watkins walked in and saw the body. So started screaming. So here it is. And then he was there 130 to 144. So all that action happened right there. So PC Watkins was right there. First one on the scene, never left. When did PC Amos Simpson come then? So well, one argument was they're saying, no, he was part of a special branch so they can kind of hang out and go anywhere they want. There's absolutely no evidence he was part of special branch, and they would not have had him as part of special branch because of what he did. He was the acting chief. So they would never have done that. So that chain, again, everybody touched it anyway.
That is the big thing to me. When we look at DNA evidence now, if there's a crime scene that happens, one of the biggest things that you have to do for it to be verifiable is to preserve the evidence. You now have a shawl that has been out there for over 100 years, being passed from this person to another person. You know damn well that they pulled it out at a party or two over the last couple 100 years and were showing it off like, hey, look, check this out. Because at the time, they had no idea that they would be destroying evidence. So there's no way 100 years later that you could ever get any real verifiable evidence from this shawl that has been sitting in somebody's sock drawer for 100 years. It's impossible.
And that ink was actually water soluble. So here it is. We know Catherine Eddowes sold her boyfriend's shoes that day to get a drink. Sold the boyfriend's shoes without him knowing it. Why would she have an expensive shawl on that, they're out in the rain? So Catherine Eddowes, that evening was torrential rains. That shawl would have been dripping. But here's what I also see. Just think if you were Amos Simpson, your grandpa Simpson now. Yeah, I was a police officer during the Ripper murders. So of course he's going to brag to his family members. Doesn't have to be true, especially when the shawl just doesn't fit. I mean, especially, and then, to me, it's kind of funny that they selected Catherine Eddowes, who was not even part of Scotland Yard. That was a jurisdiction, completely different jurisdiction. But when you read the book, they don't talk about that.
Oh, of course not. Of course not. Because we know that all of those things are always focused on what the outcome is already, right? When people write books, and intentionally, the reason why I wrote my book, very ambiguous, and I don't really give a lot of stances. I give a lot of evidence for and against things, but I don't ever come to a real conclusion, not only because I don't know, I have my opinion, but I want people to really dig in for themselves. I want them to look, because the strongest opinion is your own opinion and your own research, not somebody else's research. Nobody can tell you what you believe. You have to believe it for yourself. So I intentionally stayed ambiguous. There is only one chapter in the book where I'm not ambiguous, and that is my favorite chapter, and that is the H.H. Holmes chapter. And I am definitely not ambiguous when I'm talking about Holmes and what I think, and specifically the idea that Holmes could have been Jack the Ripper. I am not ambiguous in my answer on that, because I think it's...
Yeah, as a matter of fact, so I was asked to go to Los Angeles to be one of the experts for History's Greatest Mysteries. And so I knew that the director had, for History Channel, had already did an H.H. Holmes docu-series to try to convince, because his Jeff Mudgett, his great grandson, was claiming this, and so they were kind of friends. And so when I looked at the list of experts that for this Jack the Ripper episode on History's Greatest Mysteries with Lawrence Fishburne, Jeff Mudgett was one of them. I go, oh my gosh. So when I talked to the director, I said, for me to go there, I insist upon giving the counter evidence to that, as in the foremost expert said he'd never crossed the Atlantic. So, but other things too, is which you know as well. So that director filmed me, and I was filmed showing the counter evidence. But when you watch it, all they do is, he wanted me to talk about the Dear Boss letter. And the reason why he wanted me to talk about the Dear Boss letter, which nobody considers that from Jack the Ripper, but it does give the name Jack the Ripper. That's where the Jack the Ripper name comes. So it's important for the Ripper lexicon. So I talked about it and gave details. So when you watch it, it looks like I am convinced that Jack the Ripper wrote it. And the reason why is because Jeff Mudgett has matched the From Hell, not From Hell, but the Dear Boss letter. Did I say From Hell letter? I meant Dear Boss.
No, you said
letter.
Dear Boss.
Okay, so the Dear Boss, he's matched the handwriting and the Dear Boss letter with H.H. Holmes. Okay, so that means H.H. Holmes was a newspaper reporter because that's who wrote the Dear Boss letter. So, but if you watch that now, it's kind of cool watching it because there are some details I like, but once they go into the Mudgett thing, I'm done with.
Yeah, it's it's interesting, and at some point I'll have Mudgett on here. Me and him have talked about the possibility of him coming on the podcast, and I would love to have him on here to give his side. And
Right.
that is one of the things, and I wouldn't even debate that here because I would love to hear it directly from him. The evidence that he's collected, the ideas that he has, because I think that is a part of healthy debate, and understanding those things is very, very important if you're going to come to a real informed conclusion about anything. And so, matter of fact, up on my my library over there, I have Jeff's book, Bloodstains, is up there. I haven't read it yet. It's on my to read list coming up very shortly. I've been working on my second book and dealing with criminals. So I've been kind of focused on that. But I really want to get back to that because I'm interested to see what he's come up with. Of course, I've seen, American Ripper and, stuff like that he's pretty prominently featured in. And so I think it's interesting, all of those ideas. I don't give them a lot of weight, but I think they're interesting. And well, my opinion on all those things. And I'm sure me and Jeff will have plenty of time to talk. I hear he is a perfectly wonderful man. So that's good.
Yeah. Right.
I think it's fascinating. I didn't know all of that background information on Tumblety. And I think that one of the things, and I don't know that I've even released this here yet, but, true crime, beyond the headlines, True Crimes, Myths, and Legends currently is working on 4 volumes. Volume 4 will have assassinations in it. And so I will end up covering some of the myths and legends around the Lincoln assassination for sure. And I'm sure Tumblety will get brought up in that. And so,
because I've actually discovered not, so 1865 was the assassination. 1864, the reason why they arrested him was because here's David Harold. They're claiming David Harold was the working for Tumblety in Brooklyn in 1864. Well, what happened was John Wilkes Booth and his brothers, December 1864, were in New York City, performing a play. Their mother was there, so Tumblety clearly went there because what happened was this young man that worked for John Wilkes Booth, when the assassination occurred, and that young man ran away from Washington D.C., came back to Brooklyn, and the D.C. detectives followed him, and they said, "Yeah, this Tumblety, David Harold was working for him, but he called himself Blackburn." Well, I know that Mark A. Blackburn was working for Tumblety, an actual Mark Blackburn. You look at him. Oh, by the way, the other thing I found out, you know that iconic photo of Tumblety with a Prussian helmet?
Uh-huh.
That's not him. He
Oh,
put that on
wow.
his 1871 autobiography, and in 1872 autobiography, he took it off and put on a different thing. What happened was there's another photograph of Tumblety. Neil Story, an historian, found it, and on the back of that, he found it because it was in the archive in the personal collection of Henry Hall Caine, his boyfriend in the 1870s. And on the back of that photograph, in Hall Caine's handwriting, is Francis Tumblety. Those pictures don't match. So I'm convinced that young man, that person in the Prussian helmet, is Mark A. Blackburn. You look at pictures of David Harold, and that picture right there, they're both dark hair, tall, and they look alike. So I think it's a case of misidentification, especially when the boy said his name was Black. He said his name was Blackburn because Blackburn did work for him. So, and by the way, 1863, John Wilkes Booth was performing in Buffalo, New York, and guess who was hanging out with him? Francis Tumblety. So he was connected. The police didn't know that, though. They didn't know that.
Yeah.
But we found that out later. But
Wow. That's neat. So so this is a bone of contention between me and my good friend and Scottish connection, Mary, because she is kind of our resident ripperologist. You know, she loves the whole thing, of course, coming from the UK. It's something that she's grown up with. And we were just talking about this last week when we did the live, but she is very much convinced. She believes it was someone dealing with the royal family that did it.
Yeah.
And you know, there's all kinds of theories out there, and some of them more fanciful than others. And you know, one of my favorite things, and actually consequently what a lot of people know my story, that, you know, I grew up around a lot of true crime. My dad met Manson. Our family had a lot of connections with the mafia and stuff like that. Half of my family is Italian and all of that stuff. But what really got me back into true crime was actually the story of Jack the Ripper. And so it was two things. It was the ultimate Jack the Ripper companion that I showed. That was Evan's book, right?
Yes.
That was one of the things that really got me back into it. And the other one was the movie From Hell, which I've always loved that movie. You know, oh, why can't I think of his name now? Who is it?
Johnny Depp.
Yeah, Johnny Depp.
So I got to tell you quickly about that.
Okay.
Johnny Depp read my screenplay because I'm friends with Stuart Evans. You know, I remember I stayed at his place, and what happened was I did a podcast with Jason Hawes, that Ghost Hunters guy.
Yeah.
And the man in Florida heard this wealthy guy, and he wanted to do a kind of a movie on Tumblety, kind of like a P.T. Barnum, Satan P.T. Barnum kind of guy. So he asked me to do a screenplay. So I had somebody help me do a screenplay. But what happened is he was going to bring me to LA, meet with some of these people. And so what happened is he died. He died of cancer, this Harvey Rockman. So that didn't happen. But Stuart Evans contacted Johnny Depp because Stuart Evans was actually the worked on the From Hell. He went to Prague, and he was the man that was the expert for Johnny Depp. And so they were friends. And so Johnny Depp he said to Stuart that he read my screenplay, really liked it, but he's doing music now. So yeah, fat chance he really read it, but at least he looked at it.
That's neat, man. So one of the things, I'm a huge P.T. Barnum fan, and again, it fits the whole thing. Matter of fact, right in front of me right now, I've got a picture of P.T. Barnum, a couple cabinet cards up on the wall. I actually have a cabinet card of P.T. Barnum and Tom Thumb and his wife, and on the back of it, it talks about how much money he paid over. I think it was like $15,000 for the dress at the wedding of Tom Thumb for the wife. And it's an incredible period of history because, again, there's no bigger grifter than P.T. Barnum. But P.T. Barnum did things that, like, especially for the sideshow community, those people at the time had no opportunities, right? They were throwaways of society. And he gave them a place, he paid them well, and he made them as famous as they were ever going to be. And, there are a lot of people now that will say that that was exploitive and everything, but really, they had no other chance. They were either going to be in they were going to be hidden away or, thrown in some kind of sanitarium or something. And so it's like, this guy was really a visionary. And, not that, of course, the whole movie with Hugh Jackman and everything is obviously the fanciful end of that. He was certainly not that either. But I always thought, actually, right directly across from me, I have a Harper's Bazaar from 1865, and that has the original drawings, the etchings of P.T. Barnum's American Museum burning. And
Really? Wow.
I have an original of that. Yeah, I wonder, are there, my sense of murderabilia and stuff like that, I would be interested if I could find. I don't know if Tumblety ever had any like ads out. I would assume he would have had to because he was selling all this medical stuff. But that would be cool.
And then what I also found out was that his niece, Mary Fitzsimmons, well, because Tumblety was a transient, he would buy things, he would bring it to Rochester and give it to have his niece hold on to it. So she was the holder, and it wasn't Mary that said it under sworn testimony. It was her brother Michael Fitzsimmons said that. So what I did is looked for, since live in Buffalo. Okay, maybe there's some more Tumblety stuff in somewhere in Rochester, but every single building that they had is since been removed, and so I'm sure it's completely gone now. So it's new buildings. Actually, the buildings are actually now from 1910, and it was actually his nephew's son that acquired that land and sold that land. So those buildings were actually built there by Tumblety's nephew's son, Tumblety's brother's son. That's what it is. Tumblety's brother's son, Patrick, is the one that did those buildings. So still connected to Tumblety, but now there's slums and stuff like that. But
boy, that's you think about that when we look at the history of America and how in Europe, there was always kind of like this ruling class, the aristocracy and all of this stuff. But we had a similar thing here. Henry Ford and, these people that had, these giants of industry and stuff that really ruled how things were done here in the country for years and years and years, and at the same time, it hasn't changed a whole lot. Several of those families still have, their influence, when we look at the medical companies and stuff like that, which again, all came from the Rockefellers and, that end of it, that all still have their lobbyists and things like that within our own government. And it's interesting when you look at all of those things, where that all comes from. And I think, that's where you get, you start digging in and you go down all the conspiracy rabbit holes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Cool, man. Well, hit us with anything else. I know we're running a pretty good time here. I have always, my philosophy of podcasting has always been like, all right, we'll go as long as it goes. If it keeps going, we'll keep going. And, it'll end when it ends. I've had podcasts that have run over 2 hours. I've had some that, at an hour, I'm like, okay, I think we're about done. I think that's it. But
and usually what happens, because there was probably maybe 2 decades of people trying to say Tumblety was not a suspect because of this, because of that. I've really actually have kind of looked at that, and everyone actually there's reasons why that's incorrect. They'll say, like say Tumblety, always tried to be in the limelight, so he was just doing it just to get in the limelight, but he didn't. The only reason why he was ever in the newspapers was before 1878, and that was for his business. Because he had to be in the newspapers because he was a quack doctor, newspaper advertising quack doctor. But once he stopped that, it was antisocial personality behavior. You didn't see him, and the only time you saw him is when he got arrested for abuse, some kind of child abuse or molestation or something to that effect. So there's there's just so much to the guy, and that's the interesting thing. Someone asked me, how did you find all this new material out? You'd think that there was nothing new left over, but there's still more. My answer is nobody was looking.
Yeah.
So, and
they
that's
dismissed him.
Exactly. And then, so what you start to find out is Scotland Yard took him so seriously that not only did they have 2 Scotland Yard detectives in New York City, they actually had Inspector Andrews come to Canada. And Inspector Andrews, so here's Tumblety comes to New York City, sneaked out of the country. December 2nd, he landed, 1888, landed in New York City. December 9th, Inspector Andrews landed in Halifax, and he was dropping off a prisoner in Toronto, and he got new orders to find the murderer in America, the person that sneaked out of the country 3 weeks ago. Well, then people are trying to claim that it was fake news. That's not really true. He never went to New York. Well, what happened was when after Toronto's business, he went traveling back towards Halifax in Montreal, which is due north of New York. Right there is an Ottawa reporter was talking to him, and Andrew said, yeah, he had this condescending conversation in Toronto because Scotland Yard wasn't finding Jack the Ripper. So you guys aren't doing it right. You should be doing it this way. So here's what Andrew said to the reporter. I expect the same treatment in New York. Well, why would you say that if you're not going to New York? So basically, it's not New York, like New York newspapers lying. This Ottawa reporter said that. So that's right out of the horse's mouth. He was coming to New York. And then I found out that he was there at least 2 weeks. And then because of the ship that he left on was SS Oregon, and that only left in January 1889. So all of this stuff, you could see that Scotland Yard took him seriously right at the peak of the murders. But once, in July 1889, when Mackenzie was murdered, they thought she was a Jack the Ripper victim at that time. Well, Tumblety was in New York or America. Well, he was off the radar now. So he must not have been Jack the Ripper. Well, we now know that was not a Jack the Ripper victim, but back then they thought so. So then he was kind of off the radar there, but they buried so much stuff too. So, but I mean, I could keep on talking. I mean, again, it's 3 books, and the 4th one is actually being written. Actually, what's happening is I'm doing a series of articles in the Ripperologist magazine. Well, one just came out today, and it's about Tumblety's life in Canada, where he got this passion for organs and his surgery because he wanted and his interest in surgery. So, but there it is, more organs, more. So what did Jack the Ripper?
Wow. It's incredible when you really start digging in and looking at all of the evidence, and you, as a scientist, as a researcher, you really have to do that. You have to suspend your belief. And you have to look at the evidence and see where it leads. And where does that evidence really lead? And when there's that many connections, then you take your best guess at that point with all of the evidence laid out and seeing where all of that evidence points to. And I think just like Mark Hewitt, he has taken all of that evidence, and to him, it points towards Ted Kaczynski, and he has some compelling evidence there. And, I think it's always worth looking at and
Right.
seeing what's there, especially with these older unsolved cases, because the
Hmm.
truth is we're never going to get to a place where we know for sure.
Exactly.
With so many years and so much, everybody's got this story and that story. You could come up with a million things. I'm sure there's families over in England that have been, saying all kinds of things for 100 years and passing it down. My great 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 granddaddy was Jack the Ripper, and we knew it because he told so and so that he
Yeah.
was there at this spot. It's just how things go. That's how these myths and these legends arise. And you have to really take a critical eye and sift through all of that stuff to see what really is true out there. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I appreciate you for going and doing all of that hard work and coming up with what you have.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the new stuff to come out. So give everybody, let them know how they can get to all of your stuff and they can learn more about you.
So basically, you found me on IMDb, but what you can also do is I have my website is basically my hub, michaellhawley.com. Some college professor has michaelhawley.com, so I didn't get that, but Michael L, my middle initial L, hawley.com. And it's got all, the upcoming documentary that's is on my next book. There's a documentary being filmed on that, and then some of the other ones, but also all my podcasts that I've been on, some other interviews, and then all the articles. In it's all free stuff, and of course, the books you can have links for those as well. But so that would probably be the best.
Yeah, nice. So it's funny. My buddy Jonathan is the one that connected the two of us
Okay.
because he has Crazy Train Radio, and he was
Oh
like,
yeah.
Jeff, he's like, you gotta talk to Michael, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then he connected the two of us, and so you
Yeah.
just never know. And I've
Yeah.
known, so it's funny how me and Jonathan met. Uh, Him and I both come from. He lives in Philly. I grew up right outside of Philly. I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and
Okay.
spent a lot of my youth in Philly. So we were both several years ago now going to Scarefest, and he had hit me up right about before then about his podcast and wanted me to come on as a guest and everything. And we were talking about some different things there. And so we were on our way to Scarefest, and he hits me up. And of course, at this point, I didn't know him at all. And he hits me up and he says, hey, I was supposed to stay with somebody there, and I was supposed to share a hotel room, but they called me and said that they're not going to be able to make it. And now I got no place to stay. And it just so happened that I was going by myself, but I had a double bed room. And
Ah.
I said, Jonathan, man, just stay with me. It's no big deal. And he's like, are you serious? I was like, brother, we're both from Philly. I was like,
Yeah.
it's no big deal. Come and stay with me. Don't worry about it. I don't want you to go and not have a place to stay. I said, I'm going to be busy all weekend because I'm vending at the show. So, but you're more than welcome to come and stay and do whatever. And so we end up hanging out all weekend together and have been good friends ever since. So it's,
That Mutter Museum.
yeah.
If you look at it, some of their uterus specimens went missing around 1888.
That's
So
amazing.
guess who traveled through Philly all the time?
Oh, yeah.
I'm
That's
just
funny.
saying.
Yeah. Some missing uteruses.
It is.
You
They
know,
do. Missing uteruses.
I'm curious about this. In any of his autobiographies, does he talk any about like his medical background?
Yeah. Well, what he does is he claims to be the person that he looks up to is a surgeon that didn't focus on the allopathic medicine, which is the normal medicine surgeons have when you go to medical school, and not the homeopathic medicines either, but the herbal medicines. So what happens is he claimed to have been an Indian herb doctor. In his first autobiography, he talked about him being a famous Indian herb doctor. You go to the next autobiography, and that phrase is gone. He eliminates his past. He no longer is this herb doctor. He talks about, and I can't remember the name, but it is an ancient. He was a surgeon that focused less on, more on medicine, fixing with medicine as opposed to surgery. So that's why people said, well, he couldn't have been a surgeon, but the guy was a surgeon. So he believed he was a surgeon. Tumblety told people he was a retired Army surgeon. And I have on his deathbed in St. Louis, the doctor that was with him each night for 20 nights had conversations with him. And they asked him, what did he talk about? The doctor says he always wanted to talk about surgery, especially amputation. So he loved it. And then they asked the doctor, he's under sworn testimony. This is in a court case. Did Tumblety have anatomical knowledge? He says, absolutely he did. He had to have to understand all the stuff he was talking about.
Yeah.
So and then, yeah.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, and I wanted to talk about this because I think it's an interesting psychological point. You talked about how Tumblety, when he was out there and he was doing all of his quack medical stuff, was out there in front of people and selling people and all of this stuff. But then after that ended, he was very antisocial. And so one of the things that's very interesting that you find is a lot of these people, a lot of these killers specifically, because they learn how to mask so well and they learn how to integrate into society. A lot of times when they're out there doing, when they're putting on the mask, they're always very outgoing, right? They're always connecting with people. Gacy was really, really good at this. He would go out there, he would get attached into all of the society, right? He got to know all of these people, but then when he would pull back, very antisocial, right? And then he would do all of his debaucherous stuff. And you see that it's very much a pattern because these people who are predators, they have to mask. And it's no different like in the animal kingdom, right? They learn how to go and be quiet in those areas and do what they want to do until they reveal who they really are. And it's a really, really interesting psychological thing where, and not saying that I know this from experience, but one of the things, and one of these days, one of my psychologist friends is going to diagnose me. But I love masks, right?
I see them behind you.
Yes, there's there. Oh yeah, that is a replica of BTK's, one of BTK's masks.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I very, very rarely, with the exception of once a year in Halloween, I will wear a mask when I go out and I dress up as Michael Myers or whatever, scare the kids in the neighborhood. But I realized early on that when I put a mask on, there's a disassociative thing that happens to me. And so I do it very, very rarely because I understand myself well enough to know that that is not a safe space for me to go. So even though I love the artistry and I enjoy the masks and stuff, I know that it puts me in a place that I don't want to be. So, knowing myself very well, I know that that's dangerous territory. So I don't do that. It's funny. I was at a show a couple years ago and they had a after party and we all dressed up in Halloween costumes because it was a haunted house convention. And I was there with a friend of mine and he was dressed up as Gacy, as Pogo the Clown. And I was as another clown, but I had a mask on and everything. And we were out there and he was dancing and everything. We were just kind of hanging out. And I had the mask on and I looked at him and I said, hey, I'm done for a little while. I got to stop. And so I took the mask off and he looked at me really funny. And he said, what's going on with you? And I said, I can just feel the separation happening. And I have to take that off. I have to allow myself to get back to my center before I can do that. And it's a really interesting thing. So when I say that I know from experience, I understand what that's like in a very physical sense.
Right.
How that happens for people that really, really struggle with that, or can really go out there and put on the show
Yeah.
and have very different intentions. So it's really interesting. I've been people. I'm really good when I get out there in a crowd, which is great. But it's definitely something when I look at all of these people that I'm studying, it's a very, very dangerous trait that they have, that
Yeah.
they can do that, except for the ones that are like, for example, like a Richard Chase, who obviously was very, very schizophrenic and is just off his nut to begin with and has a real serious like psychological disorder that he is crazy and unmedicated. That is a
Yeah.
very, very different type of killer from these organized planning killers that we're talking about.
Right.
So yeah, well, there you go. You're welcome, kids out there watching.
Well, it's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for taking time. Tell
Yeah.
your wife I said thank you
Yeah.
for letting me have you for a couple hours.
Yeah.
We will for sure talk more, and we'll have to when that new book and the documentary and everything come out, we'll have to have you back on to talk about all that stuff. Uh,
Absolutely.
uh,
Absolutely.
I know how all this goes, and there are certain things that can't be released because there's upcoming stuff, and
Yeah.
so I'll be really, really excited to hear that and get some insight when all that
Sweet.
stuff drops.
Sweet.
All right, man. Thank you. Thank you. Have a fantastic weekend, and I will talk to you soon.
You too. Nice speaking with you, Jeff.
Absolutely. There we go. All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you so much. That is another episode of True Crime, Myths, Legends, and More. Man, I got to tell you, I think I might lean towards Tumblety. So when we talk about this next week, we'll have Mary on here and we can disagree a good bit about that. I pressed her last time on why she would think that, and she couldn't give me an answer. So when she watches this, this is so Mary, next week you got to come with real answers, because I'm not going to accept any of that other bullshit this time. It's just cuz. It's not just cuz. You got to have evidence. Back it up, baby, so we know. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Make sure you like and subscribe and share it. Make sure you get it out there to everybody. And yeah, make sure you do that because it's important. I don't know. I got ring-a-ding. I don't know. I got a buddy of mine that says that all the time. It always freaks me out when he says it. I don't know why it makes me think of a belly button, but it does, and it freaks me out. So none of that. Just go like and subscribe. Talk to y'all soon. See you next week. Make sure you jump on that live and give us your opinion. See you guys.